Hi, I'm Mike Higton from Durham University, and this is the third and final video on our generative AI policy. The first video explained what generative AI is. The second video gave pointers to understanding our formal academic misconduct policy, what you're not allowed to do with AI in the context of your academic study. This third video points to some of the broader considerations that we hope you'll take into account when making your decisions about whether and how to use AI. These are things that we think you should be looking into, discussing with your fellow students, discussing with staff, so that your decisions can be informed and reflective decisions. I'm not going to be able to go into much detail in this brief video, but I'll give you pointers to a few things to think about. I'm going to talk about 4 things. One of those is a positive and 3 of them are negatives. I'm not going to come to any particular conclusion when I've summed all of those up. These are just pointers for further exploration that we hope you and those around you will undertake. So the first point I want to make is an important one. As we've developed our policy and as we've discussed it with people around the Common Awards institutions, some of what we've heard has been from people who are neurodivergent in one way or another. And that's included some people who are dyslexic, some people with ADHD and others. And some of those people have reported that the advent of generative AI tools has been really useful for them, in fact transformative for them, that it's enabled them to do things that they previously found very difficult or all but impossible, that these tools have been a real godsend for them as they see it. And of course, there are questions to ask about whether the barriers that generative AI is helping people to overcome are themselves problematic, whether those barriers shouldn't really be there. But in a world where those barriers do exist, it does seem to be the case that generative AI is helping some people, particularly some neurodivergent people, to overcome them in a way that previous tools available to them really haven't. The second point that we'd like you to explore is about the impact of the use of generative AI on people's learning more generally. If you habitually get an AI to do something for you, you don't learn to do that thing for yourself. And if AI is being used to fulfill a trivial task that you have no interest in learning how to do, that doesn't really matter. But if you get AI to do some of your thinking for you, some of your learning for you, then you won't do that thinking or learning, and you won't learn how to do that thinking or learning. If, for instance, you routinely get an AI to suggest your essay structure, you won't learn to structure essays for yourself. Now, you may think that doesn't particularly matter because you're not planning on writing any essays once you've finished your course. But that skill of learning to structure an essay is part of a skill of learning how to organize your thoughts, learning how to identify what the important topics are in some jumble of thinking that you're involved in. And that is an important bit of learning. It's a task that you're likely to be involved in other ways well beyond your formal educational program. So you need to be asking questions about what the uses of AI that you engage in are doing to your learning and whether there are aspects of your learning that they're undermining. There's a third thing to be thinking about, and that's the way in which AI just gets things wrong. If you rely on AI to tell you things, some of the things it tells you will not be true. AI doesn't know things. What it does is produce plausible sounding text on the basis of all the text that it's been trained on. And that can lead it to confidently state things that just aren't true, to come up with supposed facts that aren't facts, or to come up with references to works that don't exist, or to come up with descriptions that are inaccurate. So you should be wary of relying upon AI as your only source for any fact claims, or any descriptions, or any interpretations. It's important to use your own judgment and to use other sources to check what AI is giving you. Finally, there are some broader ethical issues that it would be good for you to explore. And there are some more pointers to these in the other materials we've provided around our academic misconduct policy. There are a whole set of ethical questions surrounding AI, things such as the quantity of energy that the computer systems, the data centers that power generative AI use. It seems at the moment that the advent of generative AI is environmentally disastrous because it takes such huge quantities of electricity to run. Then there are questions about bias. Generative AI tends to reproduce the biases of the material on which it's trained and to reinforce those biases. And some of the material produced by generative AI does that in really quite problematic ways. You need to be aware of generative AI's tendency to reproduce bias. And then the last of the ethical concerns I'll mention briefly here is just about the sources of the data on which the generative AI systems were trained. So some of the big generative AIs, for instance, were trained by being given huge quantities of books by human authors to train them up. And those books were obtained without permission. And the generative AI systems, things like ChatGPT, turn out to be capable of producing text quite closely based on those books that it's harvested, to do so for profit, but without any recompense at all to the authors of those books. So some people would say that generative AI systems have been based on a form of theft. In all of these cases, I'm just giving you pointers to discussions that are quite live and quite intense surrounding generative AI at the moment. I don't want to hand you conclusions, but I do think it's important, if you're going to use generative AI, that you look into these things for yourself, that you talk about them with your fellow students, that you talk about them with your tutors. It's important that you come to your own informed judgments about whether and how to use generative AI.